Hi, and welcome to One Simple Recipe, where we're hoping to put you one step closer to better health. I am Judy Matuski, and I'm a registered and licensed dietitian with Athens Nutrition, as well as a culinary nutritionist. And I'm here today. We're all about apples this month, so we have another really good apple recipe. I hope you had a chance to get out and either pick apples or at least get to a great farm with apples. We have a couple up near our cabin, and that's where we always get our apples. So my refrigerator is sort of inundated right now with some really good apples. So I've been playing around with a lot of different recipes, and this one I think you're going to really love. It's a little bit of a spin on pancakes, and for me, this recipe can serve as a really good dessert as well. So it is called an apple Dutch baby, and it's really a German pancake. And the difference between a Dutch baby or a German pancake pretty much has to do with the leavening. So traditionally, these pancakes would be made without any leavening, so no baking powder, no baking soda, simply using the heat of the skillet as well as the oven to really give that rise with, the release of steam. I'm going to cheat a little bit. You can do it this way. When I was playing with this recipe, either I wasn't getting things hot enough or I'm not sure what was happening. But anyway, I am going to add just a little bit of baking powder, and that's fine. I don't think there's any real rules here, just to help with it so you get that puff, all right? So let's talk a little bit about the ingredients. Again, as all of our recipes are it's pretty simple, not a long list. So today we have obviously apples, and it's really your choice. If you are buying yours from the supermarket, fine, but Honeycrisp would be a good one. You want something that's tart, but maybe not as tart as a Granny Smith, unless you really like a real tart apple, that's fine. Something a little crispy. I wouldn't really do a Macintosh, that's probably too soft. I don't even know exactly what these apples are that we got from the farm near our cabin, but they're really good. They're like kind of that perfect sort of tart, crisp, and a little bit sweet. This is kind of half of the size that I used, and the recipe calls for like 2 to 3 cups of apples. You want enough to cover the bottom of about a 10-inch cast iron skillet, or at least a skillet that can go in the oven. So that's key, right, for this recipe. This was 1.5 apples, about this size, that I sliced up pretty thin. I left the skin on. Again, the skin is where a lot of the nutrition lives. So we want the skin. If you are getting organic, great. If not, just wash them really, really well. But I think, again, skin's pretty important for the fiber and the nutrition. So anyway, I have the apple sliced. This is about 4 cups. And so that was 1.5 apples. I probably really only needed one large apple is enough. So I probably won't use all of these. I have a skillet, my cast iron skillet, already heating up. Now in this skillet, I modified this recipe a little bit. And when I look at recipes and I curate the recipes that I bring to you, I'm looking for a lot of different things. One, simplicity, so it's not a lot of steps, not a lot of ingredients, when we can kind of avoid that. Also, I really want to make sure that we're not, getting, certainly fat is healthy, the right type of fat, not too much, so it's not such a rich and heavy kind of recipe, where we're using, some healthier fats, and we'll talk about what I did with this one. And, and again, just looking for a lot of plant-based ingredients so we can bring you higher fiber, more whole grains. So when I'm really looking at recipes, those are the things I'm looking for, and those are the things I'm trying to tweak, and still certainly retaining the flavor. That's what we don't really want to lose, or it's just not worth it. All right, so this recipe traditionally would call for quite a bit of butter. Because butter is just higher in saturated fat, and almost all of my clients are really trying to lower their cholesterol or have some cardiovascular risk factors. We want saturated fat pretty low. And I think that's just generally healthy for all of us. It just reduces inflammation. So we want plant-based fats. We want the unsaturated fats. So I'm only using 1 tablespoon of butter, which I think helps to bring some flavor, because we do want that, and that's fine. That's okay for this amount. And then what I just use is a liquid oil. This happens to be canola. You could use like a grape seed, or even a peanut oil would work with something like this. But anyway, there was 1 tablespoon of butter and 1 tablespoon of oil. Now, I went ahead and used this non-aerosol cooking spray that I picked up just to make sure, because you don't want this to stick. You really need to make sure that this is well coated, your skillet is well coated, because you want this to puff. And if it's sticking, it won't puff. So you're going to kind of take your skillet and just and just make sure that the sides are coated with this is a, 1 tablespoon of butter and 1 tablespoon of oil. And I think that's plenty, and that's not too much, but it's enough to kind of help with this rise. Now we're going to take our apples, and we're just going to add these right to the skillet. And again, it's going to be enough to kind of cover the bottom of the skillet. So like I said, I'm not going to need all of these. So it's about 2 or 3 cups. It just depends. You don't want too many apples to weigh it down, but you want enough certainly to make sure you're getting an apple like in every bite. So I'm probably using about 3 cups of those apples. And now we're going to add just a little sweetener, and I'm going to use some brown sugar. I'm actually getting to the low end of my brown sugar. So, as you know, when you're measuring brown sugar, you want to make sure you're pressing it into the measuring. And that's 1/4 cup. Then if you want less, that's fine. If your apples are a little bit sweeter, use less. If they're tartar, I don't think you'll need more. I think, 1/4 cup is plenty. And now, for simplicity, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon or 1½ teaspoons of cinnamon would be fine. But I am going to go ahead and add a teaspoon of cinnamon, and I'm going to add a little bit of nutmeg. But I'm just going to use the pre-ground nutmeg, and I'm going to use maybe ½ teaspoon, maybe not even quite, a little less than ½ teaspoon. So I did the nutmeg and the cinnamon. I think the recipe just says for cinnamon, which is fine. Just again, we're just trying to keep everything as simple as possible. You can just go ahead and use cinnamon. If you have pumpkin pie spice mix, go ahead and use that. I don't, so I'm just going to do this. All right, now we're just going to stir this around. And again, the key to this recipe is that to get the puff, if we were not going to be using any baking powder, is you really want everything hot. So these apples are just going to kind of sizzle away in here, and this is helping to heat up the skillet. We're getting the skillet nice and hot. And I have my oven preset at 425. So this is going to go into a really hot oven. So it's going to go from the hot stove directly into the hot oven, and that's what creates the rise and the puff. So again, you go ahead and use some baking powder, or if you want to try it without. Traditionally, I think that was sort of the idea behind these. They leaven and puff without any additional leavener added to the recipe. All right, so stir these around. Just stir your apples around so that they're kind of nicely coated in the brown sugar that now has melted. And we're going to let these simmer just for a few minutes while we make the batter, so that you do want to sort of soften them a little bit, because there's not quite enough time in the oven for these apples to soften. If we weren't doing it over the stove. But we also, obviously we want some texture for those apples too. We don't have to cook them later. Okay. All right, so let me just turn it down a tiny bit. I'll let that cook a little bit. So now we're going to make the batter. And the batter is basically a really, pretty typical for what would go into a pancake batter. So we're going to use, I got to recipe for the amounts. Okay, so we're using 3/4 cup of flour. Now I'm using all-purpose flour for this. I wanted to use whole wheat pastry flour so that to get that fiber and to get to make this a little bit more nutrient dense. I didn't have it and I couldn't find it. I went on Bob's Red Mill and ordered what I thought was whole wheat pastry flour, but it says whole wheat graham flour. So I have to double check to make sure that this is actually a pastry flour. So I didn't want to use it because I was afraid that maybe if you're using all whole wheat, it might kind of weigh down the recipe a little bit. You might not get the puff. So to be on the safe side, I'm just going to use all-purpose flour. But if you do have whole wheat pastry flour, that would even be better from a nutritional perspective. All right, so now we're going to add milk, and it's 3/4 cup of milk, so it's equal parts flour to milk. I'm going to use, I have a can of low-fat evaporated milk, and because I had it opened, I used it for something yesterday. I want to try to use this up. So I'm going to use this as my milk. You could use any milk. It could be plant-based milk if you prefer. It could be a low-fat dairy milk, whatever your preference is. And now we're going to add 4 eggs. And again, we know eggs are going to kind of bring protein to this dish. If you wanted to do all whites, then it would be 8 egg whites. I think that would work well as well. But we're going to go ahead and do the eggs. And these are large eggs. So it's nice. It does call for 4, and I think this is probably going to serve 4 people. So everybody gets a full egg, which is great. So for breakfast, we really want to bring protein into breakfast. That tends to be a little bit of the problem with regular pancakes. They're basically really, cake. It's like eating cake for breakfast. So they're usually refined flour, so there's really not a lot of fiber. There's a lot of sugar, and it's not necessarily a real healthy, which we know, choice for breakfast. Anyway, obviously they are delicious, right? So I just added a pinch of salt. Now I'm going to add about a half a teaspoon of baking powder. And what am I missing? I think we're just missing, we have the milk, the flour, the eggs, the baking powder. So I think that's everything. Yeah, all right. So now this we're just gonna whisk around. Now the original recipe, I went through a couple of different recipes just to try a couple different ones. They all kind of worked pretty well, but I was trying to figure out how do we simplify this as much as possible. And I just didn't want to do this in the blender. Now, if you did it in the blender, it would really, get all of the little lumps and bumps out of the flour mixture, but I just didn't want to have to get a blender out, put it in the blender, and then clean your blender. I just think it's a whole lot easier, at least for me, to clean a mixing bowl than to get too many extra equipment out that you may not need. But you could just throw this all in the blender if you wanted to, and that would even be faster and easier. I think it's fine with just a whisk. So we're just whisking up, again, the flour, the milk, pretty much your basic pancake batter. But with this, unlike regular pancake batter, with usually you leave some flour lumps in it, all the recipes really wanted this you want to get this smooth. All right, so I think that's pretty good for our batter. All right, I'll just put this to the side. And now this just gets poured. We're just going to take this and pour it right over the apples that have been cooking. And you can see, well, let me just grab my thing so I can show you this. All right, so the apples are sort of bubbling away and they're softening a little bit and they look really perfect. It's exactly how you want them to look. All right, I'm going to turn off my stove now, and now we're just going to pour this right over top. And then this is going to go directly into the oven. So again, my oven has been heated for a while. So you want your oven to, set your oven to 425. Make sure it's fully up to speed and up to temperature, and even up to temperature for maybe 10 minutes or so before you even pop this in the oven. Again, because this is all about heat. All right, so that's our batter. And now let's go ahead and I'm going to just take this. Let me just show it to you. All right, so it's just, the apples are, just sort of floating in there. And then this is going directly into this oven. I'll put it kind of like in the top 2/3 of your oven. And now this is going to take, I'm going to set the timer for 15 minutes. So that's going to take about 15 minutes to really puff up and to create this little Dutch baby that we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this cook for 15 minutes. We're going to close out, but then I'll come back on and I'll show you the finished puff, and hopefully it will puff. If yours does not puff, it's still going to be absolutely delicious. Don't worry about it. And the thing with this Dutch baby, it's almost like if you're going to be making it, you kind of want to make it if you have people kind of sitting around, you're having maybe breakfast. I never do brunch, but if you do brunch, that would be great, because when you pull it out of the oven, it's kind of like a little showstopper. You're like, oh, and then everybody's like, oh my gosh, it looks so neat. It's like all puffy, but it does deflate pretty quickly. So unless you're like pulling it out of the oven and serving it to everybody right away, it is going to deflate, which is fine. It's still, it's fine. That's kind of how it just ends up being served, but it looks so cool when it does puff. But the puffing aerates the pancake, so this is a much, I want to say it's lighter, but it's like custardy. So it puffs, and then as it drops back down and the air loses its air, it gets a little bit more custardy, but it also has this really good kind of crunchy texture around the surface, and it browns a little bit. So it's such a cool little riff on regular pancakes, and like I showed you, it's so easy to do. I'm sure you could do other flavors. You could probably do a pumpkin one. That would be kind of fun to do this time of the year. You could certainly change it up, or traditionally it's not with there wouldn't be any apples in there. It would just be the pancake. But anyway, I love it with the apples. Again, it just brings more nutrition, more fiber, and then it brings fruit too. But you could do berries. That would be really good if you wanted to do it like in the summer. So like I said, I'm going to close out. I will bring it back on as soon as I pull it out of the oven, and hopefully we have that nice puff, and I will go back on camera to show that to you. All right, if you do try this, give it a try. One thing I wanted to mention is that my cousin Deborah brought this to my attention. I wanted to mention this last week. If there's a new documentary out, it's called The Blue Zones. I think it's like Live to 100. The secrets of the blue zones. Dan Buettner, I believe is his name. He's a researcher behind these different countries where there's pockets of individuals, not just living to 100, but living really well and really healthy and really vibrant into their hundreds. So this is pockets of centenarians. So if you get a chance to watch that, it's on Netflix. I would highly recommend it. And all of it, basically, as far as Athens Nutrition and our nutrition guidelines, we really do follow a lot of those dietary guidelines that are kind of universal throughout all of the blue zones, because we believe the research that supports that is really, really strong. So again, all of the recipes that I bring to you, the recipes that live on our website at judymatusky.com, the recommendations that we bring, all are kind of based in the science behind the research around the blue zones, which you might be you've heard of the Mediterranean eating plan, or maybe the DASH diet, or maybe the MIND diet. They're all very similar, and they're all based in a lot of good evidence-based nutrition. So again, our guidelines really, and the recipes that we bring to you are really based around those guidelines. So anyway, if you have a chance to see that, if you have a chance to go watch that documentary, I'd highly recommend it. All right, I will jump back on in 15 minutes and I'll show you the finished results. Stay well till then. Bye-bye.